This is Sony's new 50mm G Master, and with a maximum aperture of f1.2, it's their fastest lens to date. Let's get undone.
Gerald Undone. He's crazy.
What's happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and it's been S-Log since I've seen you. So as usual, some disclosure. Sony sent me this lens to make this video. I do not get to keep it. No money changed hands, and they don't get any input on this video's production or get to preview it before it's posted. This video does have a sponsor though, and that's Storyblocks. And while we're on the topic of being lent stuff from Sony, I'd like to remind my viewers that despite the recent string of videos, this is not a Sony-only channel. But can we all agree that Sony is releasing products like crazy lately? It feels like every week there's a new product to cover. It's quite impressive in some ways, but part of me wants them to slow down so I can take a break. But anyway, let's talk about this lens. Something you should know about me, if you don't already, is that I'm not a big fan of 50mm as a focal length. When I bring the camera up to my eye, it never feels like the composition that I want when a 50mm lens is attached. So I think the only fair thing for me to do is just tell you what is technically good and bad about this lens and leave my subjective opinions out of it as much as possible. Because this lens is personally not for me, but it is a great lens. Physically, it's quite similar to the other G Master primes like the 24mm or the recent 35mm with the same declickable aperture ring and overall aesthetic. This one is just bigger, approximately 40 to 50% bigger than the 35mm, coming in at 805 grams and about 10.8 centimeters or 4.25 inches tall. It's very similar in size to the 50mm f1.2 for Canon RF, but the Canon is 150 grams heavier. It also shares the same minimum focusing distance as the Canon at 0.4 meters or 1.32 feet, but the Canon is $300 more expensive, as I'm told that this Sony lens will be $1,999 US. In the box, you get the protective case. It's nice, well padded, and then you get the lens hood, which is the style like this with the release button. Nothing to complain about there. These are the same accessories that you normally get with a G Master lens. And this lens is weather sealed for dust and moisture resistance. One thing that's physically different about this lens versus those aforementioned G Masters is the front filter thread. The 24mm and the 35mm lenses both have a 67mm filter diameter, but this new 50 takes 72mm filters. It also has an additional function button on the top of the lens, which could be handy for portrait shooters when switching to vertical orientation. Other than that, it's a G Master lens, so you can expect pretty similar performance to the other lenses in that line, including similar annoyances. For example, just like I complained about on the 35mm, the focus breathing is quite aggressive on this lens. Not nearly as bad as the 35mm, but still quite evident. It also doesn't have a stellar reproduction ratio. As I mentioned, it competes fairly with the other 50mm f1.2 lenses, but I don't really find it that impressive when it comes to getting very tight detail shots. But maybe that's just a subjective complaint of mine about this particular focal length. And like other G Masters, it excels at autofocusing. The focus transitions are smooth and snappy and extremely reliable, and when gathering my sample images, which I'll show you in a moment, I didn't have a single issue with missed focus or hesitation the entire time that I've been borrowing this lens. It uses Sony's XD linear motors, which are not only fast, but essentially silent, so this lens is extremely quiet while focusing. Manual focusing is decent. Like the 24 and 35, it offers about 130-degree focus throw, and the response is linear and repeatable. The focus ring is sufficiently dampened, and other than the breathing, the experience is pretty great. Not cine lens level, of course, but solid for a photography lens. The aperture ranges from f1.2 down to f16. It's impressively sharp throughout the range, even at f1.2, and sun stars are visible and pronounced at f16. There is some cat eyeing with the bokeh at f1.2 as you approach the edges, but the purity and consistency of the autofocus orbs is great. You can remove the cat eyeing as you stop down, with most of it gone by f2, but you do start to see aperture blades, and they get more pronounced by f2.8. This lens, by the way, is using an 11-bladed circular iris. Flare is also well controlled, as expected from a G Master lens. Even in direct sunlight, the ghosting and glare is subdued, and the minimal reduction in contrast is terrific. In normal scenes, the contrast is excellent, colors are rich and saturated, and the rendering is very pleasing and free from any casts or impurities. Let's explore that a little further with the sample images I loaded onto my laptop. And while I boot this up, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Storyblocks. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you could really use some footage, but shooting yourself was either budgetarily or logistically unfeasible? Well, Storyblocks has you covered with an impressive collection of stock footage covering a wide range of subjects with unlimited downloads and 4K video. They're also amply supplied with backgrounds, overlays, and After Effects templates, and the interface is easy to use and navigate, and the clips are royalty-free for both personal and commercial use, so you can use them as much as you want, wherever you want. So if you think you could take advantage of a fantastic library of quality stock footage and effects, check out Storyblocks using the link in the description below. So just like when I reviewed the 35mm lens, I took some images that aren't particularly beautiful, but I think are great at showing strengths and flaws of this lens. So let's start off with some sharpness tests. In these two images here, the one on the left is at f1.2 and the one on the right is f2.8, just to see if it's soft when wide open. And as you can see, the 2.8 is a little bit better, but it's excellent at 1.2, like just absolutely fantastic. As we move out toward the edges, we can see that the stop down 2.8 is doing better than the 1.2 here now. So center sharpness at 1.2 is excellent, and it gets worse out towards the edge. But if you're doing like a portrait where you really only care about the subject in the middle, I don't think this is going to be an issue, and you can get very shallow depth of field if that's what you want and still maintain excellent sharpness. And then just to give you an idea of how sharp we're talking about here, on the right now we have the Sigma 24-70 f2.8, which is a great lens. G Master's on the left and the Sigma 24-70 is on the right. And they are quite similar, but you have to keep in mind this is f1.2 versus f2.8. And I would say we're actually getting slightly better sharpness on the f1.2. Let's take a look over in the corner. And yeah, I would say they're pretty similar. So that should give you a sort of an indication of sharpness. This lens performs approximately at f1.2 like the Sigma 24-70 performs at 2.8. So that's impressive. Now let's take a look at for chromatic aberration here. So we'll punch in here. Now you can see just a little bit of longitudinal chromatic aberration. We're going, green to purple here, and there's a little bit of lateral as well. And this is at 1.2. And if we stop down here, this is 1.6. You can see that it subsides a lot, the green and the purple. And then at f2, it's mostly gone. And we're really punched in. If we were here, you wouldn't be able to see it at all. But even at f1.2, it's not too bad. But this really gives you an idea of how shallow this lens is as we sort of stop down like this. But yeah, I was quite pleased with the chromatic aberration. Here it is at f2 again. And then here it is at f1.2. So really great results. This one here again is the reproduction ratio. I feel like that's not very tight at all. And again, this is the subjective part, but I did find that when I was bringing it up to my eye, and I would be at a distance that I thought I wanted to be from the subject, and I would bring it up, and then I'd have to pull back in order to focus. And I found like that kept happening over and over and over again. And that's probably because you can get closer with a 35 mil, so maybe that's just what I'm used to. But I was running into that problem where I was like, darn it, I had to back up, and then the composition was a little bit off. But this is what it looks like. This is as close as you can possibly focus. Fence shot, just to see again about if there's fringing throughout the frame and how it handles and the focus roll off and stuff like that. But also detail-wise, as you can see, it's incredibly sharp. But also, look how shallow that is. Like, you only get, I don't know, maybe a centimeter in focus before it starts to fall off. But it's excellent, and there's no issues really with the fringing at depth. So longitudinal is, again, really well controlled. And you can see the contrast is really quite great here as well. Then we did some brick wall stuff. This one is wide open, so you can see a little bit of the vignetting, and you can also observe a little bit of distortion. There's not a lot on this lens, and all of these images, by the way, are without lens corrections on. I don't think the lens corrections are in Lightroom yet anyway, but I turned them all off just to make sure we're using them. So this is worst case scenario for this lens, but I'm sure when the profiles are there, a little bit of distortion and vignetting is going to be corrected with your raw developer anyway. So f1.2 and then f2. So you can see a little bit of that shading in the corners is gone. The peripheral illumination gets fixed, and the distortion, maybe is a little bit better, but it's still there a little bit. It's not bad. You can just see a little bit of bowing here along the lines of the brick wall, but you can fix this in Lightroom just by adding a little bit of distortion, but again, it'll be corrected with lens profiles. Now let's take a look at f1.2 center frame versus edges. If we punch in right here, you can see it's incredibly sharp in the center of the frame. Like this is absurd. And these were all shot at like 50 megapixels, so we can really, punch in and take a look. But if we go over to the edge, we can see that it's definitely softer. And by stopping down, I think if we do a little comparison here, let's punch in here. So this is center at 1.2 versus 2.8, but if we go to the edge, we can definitely see that the 2.8 version, is this what it is, 2.8? Let me check. 2.0, actually, this is f2. So we can see that even at f2, you do get significant improvement over in the corners. And then based on that and the comments that I made about the bokeh, I would suggest that f2 might be the sweet spot for this lens if you wanted one. But as you can see here, it does do better at f2 over in the edges. Okay, next up, I took this image for two purposes. One, to give you an idea of the contrast and saturation of colors, as well that you could just kind of see the detail that it's capable of resolving. So if we punch way in here to the graffiti, we can see we have a tremendous amount of detail, and those colors really pop. They're very rich and vibrant, which I like. And in the overall scene here, the colors do well for an otherwise pretty gray day. But yeah, I'm really happy with the rendering. What do we got here? This one was just to show you how the focus falls off, which is extreme. Like this is too much for me. 50 mil at f1.2. You get these excellent details, and I love how sharp the lens is and how great it looks. But the focus just falls off way too soon. Like it's really just this one strip. But you can see that I would say that it happens quite smoothly and it's nice. It just looks a little bit unnatural to me because of how narrow it is. Like I wouldn't shoot this scene like this, but I did want to give you an idea. Out of focus object in the foreground, the water in the background, this branch is starting to come out of focus, and you can see how it transitions. It's nice. It's just extreme. It's so shallow. This shot here is to show you the aberration I was talking about. So again, detail is great, but if we punch in on the trees, let me get a little bit closer here. You can see that there's some aberration all over the little branches there. Now this one can be easily fixed. This lateral is not really that big of an issue. If we jump over into the Develop tab, go over here to Lens Correction and just increase the amount of defringe in that purple area, as we bring it up just a little bit and it's gone. So it's fixable, but you should be aware that with no corrections on, it is there and it does exist in this kind of, tree branches against the sky, which is common and you see that all the time. This shot I did for a few reasons. One, it's as tight again as you can get. So this is the maximum, reproduction of this plant. And also it's gonna show you how the focus falls off and what the out of focus areas look like, and also just how rich the colors are. A little bit overexposed in some places, but again, those greens are just so rich. I'm really pleased with how punchy and contrasted this image is. I just wish I could get a little bit tighter. Next up is, again, just for out of focus, I've got two things to show you here. One, to show you just how thin the depth of field is. So I focused on this little piece of green here, but you can see just sort of like how smooth and buttery the background is. And also this will give you an idea of how razor thin the actual focus is. And we can see a little bit of out of focus, orbs swirling around here if you want an idea of like the little micro bokeh quality that you can see here. So that's what that looks like. I actually kind of like this image. I don't know what it is. It's something, maybe it's just the color, but I like the way how it's a little bit abstract and looks great. And so yeah, I'm pleased with this lens's rendering and resolving power. Overall, this is a top quality lens that comes in lighter and a little cheaper than the competition. And if you could put a 50mm f1.2 to good use, I think you'd be quite happy with this lens. Which brings me to a question I have for you. How many of you out there are 50mm shooters? I'd love to get a sense of that from my audience, so let me know in the comments below. But that's gonna be it for me. I hope you found this video entertaining, or at least helpful. And if you did, make sure to give the old thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you did not find this video helpful or entertaining, try setting the playback speed to 75%. Yeah, all right. I'm done.